In a small, quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other's names and faces, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and families who waved hello as they passed by in their cars. It was the kind of place that looked perfect from the outside, picturesque, safe, and peaceful. But beneath this calm exterior, tension simmered like an unspoken secret waiting to boil over. Maya Johnson had lived in this town for nearly 5 years. She moved here with her husband and 2 young children after deciding it would be a better environment for raising a family. Maya worked long hours as a nurse at the local hospital, often returning home late at night exhausted but grateful for the opportunity to provide for her loved ones. Despite the challenges of balancing work and family life, she tried her best to stay positive and make the most of her situation. However, living in a predominantly white neighborhood wasn't always easy for Maya. There were subtle moments when she felt out of place. Awkward stares at the grocery store, dismissive comments from neighbors during block parties, or even jokes that landed flat because they carried undertones of prejudice. One crisp autumn evening, Maya left work later than usual. The air smelled faintly of fallen leaves, and the sky was painted shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. As she drove through the familiar streets leading to her house, she noticed an unmarked police car trailing her. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police vehicles weren't uncommon in the area, especially since the neighborhood prided itself on being safe. But something about this particular car made her uneasy. It stayed close behind her, for several blocks, its headlights casting a sharp glare into her rearview mirror. When Maya finally turned onto her street, the car followed. Her heart began to race as she pulled into her driveway and parked. She glanced at the dashboard clock. It was just past 8 p.m., still early enough for people to be awake. Nothing unusual had happened during her drive home, so why was this officer following her? Before she could process her thoughts further, the unmarked car screeched to a halt directly behind hers, blocking her exit. A tall man stepped out wearing plain clothes but carrying a badge clipped to his belt. It was Officer Greg Harris. Greg Harris was no stranger to controversy. Over the years, he'd earned a reputation for being abrasive and quick-tempered, traits that clashed with the community's expectations of professionalism. Some residents whispered about him behind closed doors, recounting stories of how he treated people differently based on their appearance. Others dismissed these rumors, chalking them up to gossip or exaggeration. What everyone agreed on, though, was that Harris wasn't someone you wanted to cross paths with unless absolutely necessary. As Harris approached Maya's car, his expression was stern, almost hostile. He tapped on her window with his flashlight, signaling for her to roll it down. Confused but compliant, Maya lowered the glass and greeted him politely. "Is everything okay, officer?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Instead of answering her question, Harris launched into an interrogation. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, shining the flashlight directly into her face. The beam blinded her momentarily, forcing her to squint against the harsh light. "This is my house," Maya replied, pointing toward the modest brick home behind her. "I live here." Harris frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Prove it," he snapped, crossing his arms over his chest. His tone was dripping with suspicion, as if he already assumed she was lying. Maya took a deep breath, attempting to remain calm. She reached for her purse on the passenger seat and rummaged through it until she found her ID. Holding it up for him to see, she explained, "Here's my driver's license. You can check the address if you want." But Harris wasn't satisfied. He leaned closer, peering skeptically at the card before shaking his head. "That doesn't mean anything," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, he added, "You don't look like someone who lives around here." The comment stung, but Maya chose not to react. Instead, she gestured toward the mailbox at the end of her driveway, which bore her last name in bold letters. "See, for yourself," she said firmly. "My name is right there." For a moment, Harris hesitated. He glanced at the mailbox, then back at Maya, his jaw tightening. It was clear he didn't believe her, but he also couldn't deny the evidence staring him in the face. Still, rather than backing off, he doubled down on his aggression, Why were you driving so slowly earlier? He barked, changing tactics. And why did you take such a roundabout way home? Maya blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in questions. I wasn't going slowly, she protested. And I took the route I always take. I don't understand what the problem is. The problem, Harris interrupted, raising his voice, is that you're acting suspicious. Now get out of the car. By now, several neighbors had noticed the commotion. Some stood peeking through their curtains, while others lingered near their front doors, watching silently. No one dared intervene, not yet. Maya, however, refused to let fear dictate her actions. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, keeping her hands visible to show she posed no threat. I'm not doing anything wrong, she said evenly, meeting Harris's gaze. If you have a legitimate reason for stopping, me fine, but if not, I'd like to go inside and spend time with my family. Her words only seemed to enrage him further. Harris clenched his fists, his face reddening as he struggled to maintain control. For reasons unknown, even to himself, he felt compelled to assert dominance, to prove that he held all the power in this situation. And in that heated moment, his anger got the better of him. Without warning, Harris lunged forward, his fist connecting with Maya's cheekbone. The impact sent her stumbling backward, crashing onto the cold concrete steps of her porch. Pain exploded across her face and she cried out instinctively, clutching her jaw as tears welled up in her eyes. Blood trickled from a cut on her lip, staining her fingertips red. Time seemed to freeze. Neighbors who had been quietly observing suddenly sprang into action, shouting in disbelief and rushing to Maya's aid. Someone called 911 while another neighbor helped her sit upright, offering words of comfort. All the while, Harris stood frozen in place, staring at his trembling hand as if it belonged to someone else. The reality of what he had just done crashed over him like a tidal wave, leaving him paralyzed with shock and regret. Though the incident lasted only seconds, its effects would ripple far beyond that quiet suburban street, setting the stage for a story that would challenge the entire community, and perhaps even change it forever. The quiet evening quickly turned into chaos as Officer Greg Harris's fist collided with Maya Johnson's face. The sound of the punch echoed through the neighborhood, sharp and jarring, breaking the stillness of the autumn air. For a split second, everything seemed to stop. The rustling leaves, the distant hum of traffic, even the chirping crickets. Time froze as Maya stumbled backward, her body losing balance and crashing onto the hard concrete steps of her porch. Her purse slipped from her grasp, its contents spilling across the ground in a chaotic mess of keys, makeup, and receipts. Pain exploded across Maya's cheekbone, radiating outward like wildfire. She instinctively brought her hand to her face, feeling the warm trickle of blood seeping from her lip. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from the physical pain but from the sheer shock of what had just happened. Her mind raced, trying to process how a routine drive home could escalate so violently. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not in her own driveway. Not in front of her house where her children might have been playing just hours earlier. Officer Harris stood rooted to the spot, his breathing heavy and uneven. His chest rose and fell rapidly as if he were struggling to catch his breath after running a marathon. His eyes darted between Maya, who was now sitting slumped on the steps, and his own trembling hand. It was as though he couldn't believe what he'd done. The anger that had consumed him moments ago evaporated instantly, replaced by a wave of panic and disbelief. He stared at his clenched fist, unclenched it, then clenched it again, as if trying to make sense of how something so small and ordinary, a human hand, could cause such devastation. Neighbors who had been watching silently from their windows or doorways sprang into action. Mrs. Anderson, a middle-aged woman who lived 2 houses down, was the first to step forward. She hurried across her lawn, her slippers flapping against the pavement, and knelt beside Maya. "Are you okay?" she asked urgently, placing a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. Her voice trembled with concern, but there was also an edge of anger directed at Harris. Other neighbors followed suit, forming a protective circle around Maya. Mr. Patel, a soft-spoken man who rarely spoke to anyone outside of polite pleasantries, shouted into his phone as he dialed 911. There's been an assault. Send help immediately." His usually calm demeanor cracked under the weight of the moment, his voice rising with urgency. Another neighbor, a teenage boy named Jake, grabbed his phone and began recording the scene, ensuring that every detail would be captured for posterity. Meanwhile, Maya struggled to regain her composure. With Mrs. Anderson's help, she managed to sit upright, wincing as pain shot through her jaw. Blood dripped steadily onto her shirt, staining the fabric dark red. Despite the throbbing ache in her face, she forced herself to focus. She needed to stay alert, to remember every word and movement, because she knew this moment would define more than just her evening. It could shape her future. "Why did you do that?" Maya finally spoke, her voice shaky but firm. Her words cut through the tension like a knife, silencing the murmurs among the growing crowd. All eyes turned to Harris, whose expression shifted from panic to shame. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he took a hesitant step toward Maya, his hands raised in what appeared to be a gesture of surrender. Or perhaps, apology. I didn't mean to," Harris stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. His usual authoritative tone was gone, replaced by something fragile and broken. He looked around at the faces staring back at him, some filled with outrage, others with confusion, and realized the gravity of his actions. This wasn't just a private altercation anymore, it was public, witnessed, recorded. Mrs. Anderson glared at him, her protective instincts kicking in. "You didn't mean to? You punched her in the face, officer, in broad daylight. How can you possibly justify that?" Harris flinched at her words, taking another cautious step closer to Maya. "Please," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Let me explain." But Maya wasn't ready to listen. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying, slightly as dizziness threatened to overwhelm her. Mrs. Anderson steadied her, wrapping an arm around her waist to keep her upright. "Don't touch me," Maya snapped at Harris, her voice stronger now, fueled by a mix of fear and defiance. "Stay away from me." Her words struck Harris like a slap. He froze mid-step, his arms dropping limply to his sides. The realization of what he had done and how far he had strayed from any semblance of professionalism hit him like a freight train. He had sworn an oath to protect and serve, yet here he was, standing over a woman he had injured simply because she dared to question his authority. The irony was not lost on him. As the crowd continued to grow, whispers spread like wildfire. Some neighbors expressed their shock and disbelief, while others voiced their suspicions about Harris's behavior. "I always thought he was trouble," one man muttered to his wife. "This proves it." Others nodded in agreement, their disapproval palpable. Amid the commotion, Maya tried to steady her breathing. She pressed a tissue to her bleeding lip, wincing as the pressure aggravated the wound. Though her body ached and her mind raced, she refused to let herself break down completely. She had faced adversity before, racism disguised as ignorance, microaggressions cloaked as jokes, but nothing quite like this. Being attacked in her own space felt like a violation of everything she held sacred: her safety, her dignity, her right to exist without fear. The sound of approaching sirens broke through the tension, drawing everyone's attention. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter as the patrol cars sped closer. Relief washed over Maya, though it was tinged with apprehension. Would the arriving officers side with Harris, or would they see the truth of what had happened here tonight? As the first responding vehicle pulled up, Harris backed away from Maya, his face pale and drawn. He ran a shaky hand through his hair, muttering incomprehensibly under his breath. For the first time in years, maybe even decades, he felt truly powerless. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating and inescapable. And as the spotlight shifted to him, he knew there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, he would have to face the consequences of his choices. The arrival of backup officers marked the beginning of a long night ahead, one filled with questions, accusations, and uncomfortable truths. But for Maya, it was more than that. It was a chance to reclaim her voice, to demand accountability, and to remind herself that she deserved justice. As she stood there, Surrounded by concerned neighbors and flashing police lights, she vowed silently to fight. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or unworthy. The flashing red and blue lights of the patrol cars illuminated the scene like a surreal stage, casting eerie shadows across the faces of everyone present. Neighbors who had gathered around Maya stood frozen in place, their expressions a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. As the responding officers stepped out of their vehicles, they immediately sensed that something was deeply wrong. This wasn't just another routine call. It was something far more complicated, explosive even. Two officers approached cautiously, their hands resting lightly on their holstered weapons as they surveyed the situation. One of them, a younger man with a nervous energy about him, turned his attention to Officer Greg Harris first. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply, his tone laced with authority. Harris opened his mouth to respond but hesitated, his eyes darting between the other officer and Maya, who was still clutching a blood-stained tissue to her face. Before Harris could say anything, Mrs. Anderson stepped forward, her voice firm and unyielding. "This officer attacked this woman," she declared, pointing an accusing finger at Harris. Her words hung in the air like thunder, reverberating through the crowd. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, some nodding in agreement while others whispered among themselves. The accusation was bold, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The second responding officer, a seasoned veteran with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, turned his focus to Maya. He knelt beside her, careful not to invade her personal space. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice softer than his partner's. "Can you tell me what happened?" Maya swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling voice. Every word felt heavy, weighed down by the gravity of the moment. "I came home from work," she began, her gaze fixed on the ground as if recalling the events piece by painful piece. "I parked my car and this officer," she gestured weakly toward Harris, "pulled up behind me. He started questioning me, asking why I was here, acting like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on, determined to get the full story out. "I showed him my ID, told him this is my house, but he didn't believe me, then he hit me. For no reason." The veteran officer nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He glanced briefly at Harris, who stood several feet away, looking like a man caught in the middle of a nightmare. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness that made him seem almost pitiable. Still, the officer knew better than to jump to conclusions. He needed facts, evidence, something concrete to piece together what had transpired. Meanwhile, the younger officer addressed Harris directly. "Is this true?" he demanded, his tone sharp and accusatory. "Did you strike her?" Harris hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed nervously. For a moment it seemed like he might deny it, try to twist the narrative in his favor. But the weight of the crowd's stares, their collective judgment pressing down on him, was too much to bear. Instead, he let out a shaky breath and nodded. "Yes," he admitted quietly, his voice barely audible. "But it wasn't supposed to happen like that." His explanation trailed off into silence, unfinished and unsatisfying. The younger officer scowled, clearly unimpressed. "You know how serious this is, right? Assaulting a civilian is a violation of protocol, of everything we stand for." Harris said nothing, his head bowed in shame. It was as though he couldn't meet anyone's eyes, not the officers, not Maya's, not the neighbors. He looked smaller now, diminished by the enormity of his actions. Gone was the imposing figure who had arrived in his unmarked car, ready to assert dominance. In his place stood a broken man grappling with the consequences of his unchecked rage. As the officers continued gathering statements, the crowd began to disperse slightly, though many lingered nearby, unwilling to leave until they saw justice served. Jake, the teenager who had recorded the incident, approached the veteran officer hesitantly. "Sir," he said, holding up his phone, "I got it all on video. Do you need it?" The officer took the device carefully, nodding in appreciation. "Thank you, son. That'll help a lot." He glanced at the screen briefly, watching the footage play back. The image was clear. Harris lunging forward, his fist connecting with Maya's face, followed by her collapse onto the steps. There was no denying what had happened, no room for ambiguity or excuses. Back on the porch, Maya sat hunched over, her body tense with pain and exhaustion. Despite the chaos swirling around her, she felt strangely detached, as if she were observing the scene from a distance. Part of her wanted to scream, to cry, to unleash the storm of emotions raging inside her. But another part, the stronger, more resilient part, knew she had to stay composed. She couldn't afford to fall apart, not now. Not when so much depended on her ability to remain steadfast. Mrs. Anderson stayed by her side, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You're doing great," she murmured, patting Maya's arm reassuringly. "Just keep telling the truth. These officers will do their job." Maya managed a small, grateful smile, though it quickly faded as the reality of the situation settled over her. What would happen next? Would Harris be arrested? Suspended? Or would he somehow wriggle free of responsibility, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone? The uncertainty gnawed at her, threatening to erode the fragile sense of control she clung. As the officers conferred quietly, discussing how to proceed, Harris finally found the courage, or perhaps desperation, to speak. He walked over to Maya, his movements slow and hesitant, as if afraid she might lash out at any moment. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice trembling. "Please forgive me. I don't know what came over me." For a moment there was complete silence. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade into the background, leaving only Harris's anguished plea hanging in the air. Maya stared at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't recoil or yell. Instead, she simply pushed herself to her feet, using Mrs. Anderson's shoulder for support. Standing tall despite her injuries, she looked down at Harris with a mixture of pity and resolve. "I don't want your apology," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. "I want justice." Her words struck Harris, like a punch to the gut. He flinched visibly, his tears flowing faster now. But Maya didn't soften. She couldn't. Justice wasn't just about punishing one man. It was about sending a message, about making sure that no one else had to endure what she had endured tonight. The veteran officer intervened before things could escalate further. "All right, that's enough," he said firmly, stepping between Maya and Harris. "We'll take care of this from here." Turning to Harris, he added, "You're under arrest. Place your hands behind your back." Harris complied without protest, allowing the handcuffs to click into place around his wrists. As he was led to one of the patrol cars, his head hung low, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The crowd watched silently as he was driven away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. For many of the neighbors, it was a surreal moment. A rare instance of accountability in a world where such outcomes often felt elusive. Once Harris was gone, the officers turned their attention back to Maya. They offered to take her to the hospital, to have her injuries examined, but she declined, insisting she'd go on her own terms. Though physically battered, she felt a strange sense of empowerment. She had stood her ground, spoken her truth, and refused to let fear dictate her actions. And in doing so, she had ignited something bigger than herself, a spark of change that would ripple through the community in ways no one could have anticipated. As the last of the patrol cars pulled away, the street returned to its usual quiet. The neighbors lingered for a while longer, offering Maya words of support and solidarity before heading back to their homes. The night may have ended, but the impact of what had happened would linger. For Maya, for the neighborhood, and for Officer Greg Harris, whose life would never be the same again. The night stretched on, but sleep was the last thing on Maya's mind. After the officers left and the crowd dispersed, she found herself sitting alone in her dimly lit living room, staring at the wall as if searching for answers written in invisible ink. Her face throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a constant reminder of what had happened just hours earlier. The bloodstains on her shirt had dried into dark, rust-colored patches, but they might as well have been fresh wounds. Their presence weighed heavily on her chest. Her husband, Marcus, sat beside her, his arm draped protectively over her shoulders. He had returned from an evening shift at the warehouse shortly after the incident, rushing home when a neighbor called to tell him what had happened. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by barely contained fury, though he tried his best to mask it for Maya's sake. "Are you sure you don't want me to take you to the hospital?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Maya shook her head, wincing slightly at the movement. "No," she replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "I'll go tomorrow. Right now, I just need time." Marcus nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Time, to process, to heal, to figure out what came next, was something Maya desperately needed. But even as she sat there, enveloped in the quiet comfort of her home, her thoughts raced uncontrollably. She replayed the events of the night over and over again, each detail sharper than the last. Officer Harris's accusatory tone, the cold glare of his flashlight, the sickening impact of his fist against her face. It all felt surreal, like fragments of a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. And then there was the moment that haunted her most. Harris kneeling before her, tears streaming down his face, begging for forgiveness. It wasn't remorse that stayed with her, it was confusion. How could someone capable of such violence also be capable of such vulnerability? Was his apology genuine? Or was it simply an act born out of fear and shame? These questions swirled in her mind, leaving her more unsettled than she cared to admit. As the clock ticked past midnight, Maya finally stood up, pacing slowly across the room. Her body ached with every step, but staying still felt unbearable. Movement gave her some semblance of control, however fleeting it might be. Marcus watched her silently, knowing better than to interrupt. He knew Maya well enough to recognize when she needed space to think, and tonight she needed plenty of it. She wandered into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, sipping it slowly as she leaned against the counter. The cool liquid soothed her throat, which felt raw from holding back tears she refused to shed. Crying wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the pain or undo the injustice she had endured. What mattered now was figuring out how to move forward, not just for herself, but for her family, her community, and everyone who had ever been made to feel powerless. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. Picking it up, she saw several missed calls and text messages from friends, neighbors, and even acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in months. Some offered words of support, others expressed outrage, and a few simply wanted to know if she was okay. One message in particular caught her eye. It was from Mrs. Anderson, the neighbor who had rushed to her aid earlier that evening. "Maya, I hope you're resting. Please know we're here for you. Whatever you need, don't hesitate to ask. This isn't right and we won't let it stand." Reading those words brought a lump to Maya's throat. For so long she had felt like an outsider in this neighborhood, tolerated but never truly accepted. Yet tonight something had shifted. Neighbors who had once kept their distance were now reaching out, offering solidarity and support. It was both comforting and overwhelming, a reminder that while hatred could divide people, moments of shared humanity had the power to bring them together. But solidarity wasn't enough. Maya knew that real change required action. As much as she appreciated the kind words and gestures, she couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was bigger than her personal experience. It was symptomatic of a deeper issue, one rooted in prejudice, systemic inequality, and unchecked authority. If nothing changed, it would happen again, to someone else, somewhere else, under different circumstances, but with the same devastating outcome. With renewed determination, Maya grabbed a notepad and pen from the drawer. Sitting back down at the kitchen table, she began jotting down ideas. At first, her handwriting was shaky, her thoughts scattered. But as she wrote, clarity emerged. She listed steps she could take: filing a formal complaint against Officer Harris, speaking to local activists about organizing protests, reaching out to journalists to share her story. Each idea fueled her resolve, giving her a sense of purpose amidst the chaos. Marcus noticed the transformation in her demeanor and smiled faintly. "You've got that look," he said, leaning against the doorway. "The one that says you're about to take on the world." Maya chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "Someone has to," she replied, looking up at him. "If I don't do something, who will?" He didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat across from her, studying her face intently. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you," he said firmly. Every step of the way. His unwavering support meant everything to Maya. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, that she had a partner willing to stand beside her through whatever challenges lay ahead. Still, the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Filing charges against a police officer carried risks, especially in a town where law enforcement wielded significant influence. There would be backlash, scrutiny, and possibly threats. But Maya was prepared to face them head-on. She owed it not only to herself but to everyone who deserved justice. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Maya had drafted a plan. She decided to visit the local chapter of a civil rights organization later that day, hoping to connect with people who could guide her through the process of seeking accountability. She also planned to reach out to trusted members of the community, including Mrs. Anderson and Mr. Patel, to discuss ways they could amplify her voice. The thought of taking these steps filled her with a mix of excitement and apprehension, but she pushed aside her fears. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting in spite of it. As sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm golden beams across the room, Maya allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Last night had changed her life forever, but it had also awakened something within her, a fierce determination to fight for what was right. She didn't know exactly how things would unfold, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't let Officer Harris's actions define her. Instead, she would use her experience as a catalyst for change, turning pain into power and silence into strength. With that thought in mind, Maya took a deep breath and stood up, ready to face whatever the day might bring. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Maya's kitchen, casting soft shadows on the table where she sat with Marcus. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirping of birds outside. Despite the calm atmosphere, Maya's mind buzzed with activity. She had spent the early hours drafting a plan, outlining steps to seek justice not just for herself, but for others who might find themselves in similar situations. Now, as she sipped her second cup of coffee, she felt a mix of determination and nervousness. Today would mark the beginning of her journey, a journey that could change everything. After breakfast, Maya changed into a simple, yet professional, outfit. Dark jeans, a crisp white blouse, and a blazer that added a touch of authority to her appearance. She wanted to look composed, confident, and ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. As she stood in front of the mirror brushing her hair, Marcus walked in holding her phone. "You've got another message," he said gently, handing it to her. It was from Jake, the teenager who had recorded the incident. In his text, he apologized for not intervening sooner, but thanked her for staying strong. He also mentioned that he had shared the video online, hoping it would bring attention to what had happened. Maya read the message twice, her heart swelling with gratitude. Though she hadn't asked him to share the footage, she understood its potential impact. If handled carefully, it could serve as undeniable evidence of Officer Harris's misconduct while shining a light on broader issues within law enforcement. With a deep breath, Maya grabbed her purse and keys. "Let's go," she told Marcus, her voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. Together they drove to the local chapter of a civil rights organization recommended by Mrs. Anderson. Located in a modest brick building downtown, the office buzzed with energy. Volunteers bustled around answering phones, organizing files, and preparing materials for upcoming events. A sign on the wall read, "Justice starts here." At the reception desk, a young woman greeted them warmly. "How can we help you today?" she asked, her eyes kind but curious. Maya hesitated for a moment before speaking. "My name is Maya Johnson. I need help." Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly regained composure. "Something Happened to me last night, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. The receptionist nodded sympathetically, gesturing for them to follow her into a small conference room. There they met Danielle Carter, a seasoned advocate known for her work fighting systemic racism and police brutality. Danielle listened intently as Maya recounted the events of the previous evening. Every detail, every emotion, every unanswered question. When Maya finished, tears glistened in her eyes, but her resolve remained unshaken. Danielle leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on Maya's arm. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said softly. "What you're feeling is valid, and what happened to you is unacceptable. But you're taking the right steps by coming here. We'll support you every step of the way." Over the next hour, Danielle guided Maya through the process of filing a formal complaint against Officer Harris. She explained the importance of documenting everything: medical records, witness statements, and any other evidence that could strengthen the case. She also encouraged Maya to press charges, emphasizing that doing so wasn't just about holding Harris accountable. It was about setting a precedent and sending a message that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. As they discussed legal strategies, Danielle introduced Maya to Jamal, a community organizer who specialized in grassroots activism. Tall and charismatic, Jamal exuded confidence and compassion. "Stories like yours have power," he told Maya earnestly. "They inspire people to act, to demand change. Let's use this moment to mobilize the community." Jamal suggested organizing a peaceful protest outside the police station later that week. He assured Maya that the event would be safe, respectful, and focused on raising awareness rather than inciting anger. "We'll amplify your voice," he promised, "but only if you're comfortable with it. This is your story, and you get to decide how it's told." Maya considered his words carefully. Public speaking wasn't something she enjoyed. It made her anxious and self-conscious, but she recognized the value of sharing her experience. If her story could spark meaningful conversations and push for reforms, then stepping out of her comfort zone was worth it. With a nod, she agreed to participate. By the time they left the office, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time since the attack, she didn't feel like a victim. Instead, she saw herself as part of something larger, a movement toward justice and equality. As they drove home, she called Mrs. Anderson to update her on the day's developments. "I'm going to speak at the protest," she announced, surprising even herself with her boldness. Mrs. Anderson gasped in delight. "Oh, Maya, that's wonderful," she exclaimed. "Count me in. I'll spread the word to everyone I know. You won't be alone out there." Word of the planned protest spread quickly. By evening, social media was ablaze with posts about Maya's bravery and calls for accountability. Jake's video, which had gone viral overnight, played a pivotal role in garnering attention. Thousands of views turned into tens of thousands, each comment echoing outrage, sympathy, or admiration for Maya's courage. Local news outlets picked up the story, airing segments that included interviews with neighbors and snippets of the footage. Overnight, Maya became a symbol, not just of resilience, but of hope. Despite the growing support, Maya couldn't ignore the backlash. Scrolling through her phone late that night, she came across hateful comments accusing her of exaggerating the incident or seeking fame. Some even defended Officer Harris, dismissing his actions as justified. Reading these messages stung, but Maya refused to let them break her spirit. Instead, she saved screenshots of the worst ones, knowing they could serve as evidence of the hostility faced by victims of racial injustice. Marcus noticed her scrolling and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Don't let them get to you," he said firmly. "For every troll, there are 100 people rooting for you." He was right. Among the negativity were countless messages of encouragement, from strangers offering prayers and well wishes to activists pledging their support. One comment stood out in particular. "Your strength inspires me. Keep fighting. We see you, and we stand with you." Those words stayed with Maya as she drifted off to sleep that night. They reminded her why she had chosen this path: to ensure that no one else would suffer in silence, to dismantle the systems that allowed such injustices to occur, and to prove that even in the darkest moments light could prevail. The days leading up to the protest passed in a blur of preparation. Maya practiced her speech repeatedly, refining her words until they conveyed both her pain and her determination. She attended meetings with Danielle and Jamal, brainstorming ways to keep the momentum going beyond the protest. And she reached out to journalists, agreeing to interviews that would amplify her message further. On the morning of the protest, nerves threatened to overwhelm her. Standing in front of her closet, she debated what to wear. Should she dress casually to appear relatable, or formally to convey seriousness? Ultimately, she chose a simple black dress paired with a bright yellow scarf, a symbol of hope and resilience. As she looked in the mirror, she whispered to herself, "You've got this." When Maya arrived at the designated spot outside the police station, she was stunned by the turnout. Hundreds of people had gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice" for Maya and no more police brutality. Friends, neighbors, activists, and even strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, united in solidarity. Cameras flashed, capturing the sea of faces determined to make a difference. As Jamal introduced her to the crowd, Maya stepped onto the makeshift stage, her heart pounding in her chest. For a brief moment, she froze, overwhelmed by the sheer number of people staring back at her. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to speak. Her voice started soft but grew stronger with each sentence, carrying her message of hope, accountability, and change. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she admitted, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But here I am because silence isn't an option anymore. What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident, it's part of a pattern we must break. Together we can create a world where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected." Applause that followed was deafening, a testament to the power of her words. As she stepped down from the stage, surrounded by cheers and tears, Maya knew she had started something extraordinary. This wasn't the end of her fight. It was only the beginning.